This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppe, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. Welcome to the Most Painful Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Hoppe. Before we get into this episode, I would like to start by thanking our audience for their support and comments about the show. Just like Evelyn Palaf, who's a specialist at the Gustave Roussy in France, who commented she finds the podcast a true gem. And she goes on to say, as a pain professional, I appreciate the flow of the conversation, sufficient space to let the listener discover and research, great insight into logistic aspect of traditional model, simple and concise is always nice and helpful. Thank you for the work. Thank you, Evelyn, for those very kind words. Our goal on this show is to deliver the best evidence-based information to help people. And for all our listeners, please continue to contact us on any of our social media platforms if you have any comments or suggestions. On our last episode, we spoke to Brittany Rosenblum about the use of medical hypnosis to help manage post-surgical pain and reduce the use of opioids. Medical hypnosis has been used for many years and seems to help manage pain. So if you've missed this episode, you can listen to it on our Spotify and Apple feed. And if you want to get notifications for the most recent episodes, subscribe to the podcast. Suffering from chronic pain can be a lonely journey that can impact our mental health, and peer support has been proven to help people connect, exchange ideas, improve mental health, and establish a community. Today I'm joined by Virginia McIntyre, president of People in Pain Network, to speak to us about how peer programs can help people suffering from chronic pain. Virginia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. And such a pleasure to be here and to talk about a topic that is very dear to my heart.
Yeah, and we've met offline, and we did a presentation, and I found it very interesting what you're doing. So maybe you can just start by telling us about the organization, and then maybe we can get into how it all started.
Okay, so I'll tell you about the organization, and then I'd love to tell you how it all started, but yeah. So People in Pain Network is a registered society in Nova Scotia. Started out west, and we brought it here to Nova Scotia, registered here probably in 2021, but it had a support group in 2017. So the support group really is to support people who are living with pain through not only peer support, but self-management education. So we provide both, and that's evidence-based self-management education.
When you're talking about the education, like where's it actually coming from? Or is it is it being provided by clinicians, or do you have a source that you go to, or how do you know you're getting the best evidence-based?
Well, a few things. So one, to share that our facilitators who run these groups are all people who live with pain. They've all been trained. They do 6-week comprehensive, really extensive training. And that's what some of the peer supports do. When they talk about things, communication skills, they learned about managing conflict, facilitators. So they learn really how to manage these groups. The education component of them comes from either having guest speakers come in. Our network will do that, which are healthcare providers, people specialists in that. So not only healthcare providers, one of our last meetings, we had someone who's music therapy, a professor from Acadia, one of the universities here. So we'll get people that it's really whatever the group wants and whatever their needs are. But we've also had the privilege over the last year working hand in hand with Pain Canada, and they have help convene all the peer support groups together. And there's us and there's AQDC, which is big in Quebec. Pain BC, which also are really leading the way with this, and Corrections Canada is with us too. And we discussed what do we need and what the groups need. And one of the things the groups needed was the facilitators had to be supported. So that's when we come into the education piece to provide them training at the beginning and then ongoing training. But we also provide them with these huge manuals that have about 33 topics in them, all evidence-based on different things about self-management, talking about social connections, guilt, pacing, movement, all these. So it's all been developed under that umbrella, and it's all evidence-based. And any resources we share with our members are also evidence-based. It'll be through organizations like that develop it, like Power Over Pain Portal or Live Plan B. So they're keeping right on top of all the evidence-based, and we're just using the material and making sure we're putting the best material out there for our members and trying to make it a lot of during our meetings and discussions, because it's not just the evidence. It's how you take this evidence and you put it into play and you adapt it to your life. And that's where this peer support comes in. We talk about it. You can put it all out, but unless you take that, half hour afterwards to discuss how are you going to use this? How are you going to move forward with it? And that's where the magic really, really happens.
And I like that because that's knowledge mobilization, which, by the way, our next episode coming up is with Deb Denman, who talks about how they taking research and really, out of a 100-page research document, they're knocking it down to 5 key points, and so people can absorb it. So I love that, and the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence do that. So that's on our next episode with Deb. But let's go back and talk about how this all started. I know you talked about it out west, so maybe you can kind of touch on how that started out west, and then how you got involved with it, and then for our audience, we are going to get into how this can help people with pain. So let's start with how it started.
So I think at West it started probably in maybe 2011. And again, I think she originally got into it for the same reason I got into it, is because people are struggling. People are, you spend a few minutes with your clinician and then you're on your own again. So, and the reason they closed out there, because the demand wasn't there anymore. And she was moving into retirement. So I got into it, and I got diagnosed with chronic pain. Well, I didn't get diagnosed. I had chronic pain in 2009 after shoulder surgery. And I think my story is very identical to many people, is that you go through healthcare provider to healthcare provider, and nobody knows. And once they don't know what to do with you, then you're dismissed. You're not believed. You get the eye rolls. I was out of work for 3 years, and then you're dealing with workplaces who don't believe you, insurance companies don't believe you, and it led to a lot of suffering and bullyingness and feeling guilt and grief. So after about 3 years, I did get into a pain clinic, and for me, it was an 1.5-hour drive to the city to get pain care, which is a 3-hour commute. You think about it, when your pain is the absolutely worst, which means, pulling over alongside the road and having to rest and things like this. So I eventually did make a long story short, I eventually did get back to work with their care and self-management and learning about chronic pain. So it took me a lot of time before I would actually share that I had pain. I decided that, maybe I can do something, because there's nothing in our communities. People are waiting years and years to see pain physicians. Our clinicians don't know what pain is, chronic pain is. So I decided to open up a peer support group. And I figure I'm going to do this for other people. Well, let me tell you, they have done more for me than I think I've done with them. Being in this room, I'm able to remove my mask. I'm able to talk to them. I'm able to share that I live without pain, without getting those eye rolls or disbelief. So that's how our first group started in 2017 here, an in-person group. When COVID hit, there was a demand to go through virtual. Now, we're a nonprofit organization. We had no money. So we're lucky a researcher in Central Halifax here was able to pay for our Zoom link for the couple of years to get us up and going. So we did that, and the demand grew. We became more and more national, because now we're virtual. We had to go from an evening group to add to a daytime group to add to a young adults group. And so then when she decided to retire, we brought the organization to Nova Scotia and registered as a society here. We do have a charity status, and we've now have 2 more in-person groups. So we have now 3 in-person and 3 virtuals. It's just... so that's how it all came about. The demand is there, and I'm constantly getting emails from people, I'm suffering, I can't stop crying, I can't get care. So the one thing we can do is offer space to learn what chronic pain is, about skills, and to be in a room with people. And what's really nice about our groups, because a lot of groups, if you're done through the healthcare providers, some will try to offer some peer mentor, peer support with it, and some not, but they go through a time span. And then that's it. There's no time span. We have people that have been going to our groups for 3 and 4 and 5 years. It's what they need and when they need it, and come as long as they want. And it becomes a connection and a home base and friendships.
Yeah, and I mean that's the key with community is to, and peer support, I guess, is to build that community and to share those experiences, and of course, as you say, to learn. I mean, we see that. With the Alpine challenge that we're doing with veterans, the intent is similar to what you're doing, is to develop a community, but also to educate and provide that knowledge. and to get people moving again. I mean, veterans have that other additional challenge is that they have to move from one very strict dependent culture back into a civilian culture. So that kind of adds to their pain a little bit. But the idea is the same, right? Is sharing knowledge. And I think of my own journey in this too is, I'm a very active guy. I've been to physio and chiropractors and kinesiologists and all that good stuff, but very limited understanding on chronic pain a long time ago. That's obviously changed now. And that's one of the reasons we did the podcast too, is to try to educate people, because I don't know if you're noticing that with your groups, but we see it with our groups of the veterans is once they have knowledge, it's amazing what happens afterwards. We have people who, one girl who was on this challenge who hadn't been to the gym for 7 years and found that community, got that knowledge, and now she's back at it. She's doing triathlete. It's just amazing what people can do. So I'd love to hear some stories about the changes that you've been able to do with that peer support model that you're doing.
I think you're right. It really is the knowledge, and it's the connections, and it's to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one. It's okay if you can only walk to the end of the driveway today,
Yeah.
where your neighbors or your family might say, oh my goodness, we don't say that. It's like, that's progress, but tomorrow you might get a little bit longer. What's interesting about our group, in next month we're going to go out for lunch together, and we've done that as breakfast. So it is a connection, and they do get moving. We've had a beautiful young person join one of our groups, and sometimes people come. And my idea was for when they first started coming to group that they'd done self-management classes or something, because we've really partnership with one of our pain clinics who has now closed, but originally. That they would roll from the safe managed classes into us because they can't get those classes or get physicians. We're getting people come in that are really in the worst of their pain. So we've had one person come in and virtually and could barely leave the camera on, put the camera on, they have to turn it off. They're not doing really well. And over the year have evolved in the camera on. And not only that, to checking in on other people who are coming in or letting them know, there's another group too if you can't make this one. And to now being one of our facilitators. It's just the evolution. We're witnessing it. The people are just and feeling good about themselves. And that's what it is. And for me to go in this space to actually share, I may have taken on too much last month, or I may, without getting the eye roll where someone else would say, well, you only did this, with the true understanding about, well, yeah, okay, now what are your next steps? So we've seen a lot of evolution with people coming in, and even when their pain is the worst, just to be in a room with other people who understand and that weight come off their shoulders that they could share.
Yeah, and especially if we look at, like you just mentioned, a closure of a medical or of a pain center in your area. BC's had a lot of that as well too. So people really have to educate and advocate for themselves to really manage their pain. But I'm curious because one of the challenges we have when we look at peer support or we're using more of a coaching model, but for military people, it's moving from a dependent culture into an independent culture. And so how are you managing, people becoming too dependent on the peer support versus trying to get some independency to move forward with their own pain management in their life?
I'm not seeing that, Tom. And I understand about the military. My husband is retired military. So we've moved around and been in that culture quite a bit. We have a base here and do get some veterans who come to our group. But I don't think I see that because it's a meeting once a month. So they're still out there. They're still by themselves. It's like once a month you're coming to a little bit of education session and having a coffee with some friends. So you don't see that dependence. For most people, we are seeing some progress. Actually, I think everybody we're seeing progress. It's different at what paces they're seeing their progress. Mm-hmm. And even just coming and sharing, this is what's happened to me, and learning and seeing them smile. To me, that's the start of progress.
Yeah, that's excellent. So have you, now your organization, I understand, has grown. It's still in the East Coast, or has it grown beyond the East Coast?
Well, I will only have in-person groups in the East Coast because that makes it easier for me to manage handle, but definitely national because of the virtual groups. We've had places People from the States want to come in, and Africa, and we've had to say we can't go international. It's just too big. The one thing we do, if we have people come in from BC, let them know that Pain BC has groups there. And then they're welcome to join ours too, depending on the times, but let them know that there's wonderful groups there too. And especially with connecting with these other national organizations, we're all having some sort of consistency and competencies for our facilitators, which is really nice. So, yeah.
And has your organization been working with any researchers to show the effect of peer support?
Well, that's a great question, of course. I'm all about research, and I've looked up that, and we do know research has, especially around mental health, has shown and proven its effectiveness, and effectiveness not only for people living with pain, and the more it's effective for people living with pain, the more effective it is for the clinicians too. And we know, Health Canada's action plan for pain recognizes peer support as one of the core recommendations. But I did do last year is for the strategic patient-orientated research, which is through the CHIR, they did a call out for priorities for research, and I dropped in peer support for pain. And there were 63 applicants, and mine was chosen of one of them. So of the 20 chosen, peer support was. So I will co-lead this with a professor at a memorial, and we've got everything in motion now to do a systematic review of articles, what's out there, and then we'll not only identify what's out there and the effectiveness of peer support, but questions like, how do clinicians see it? What are the gaps? Why are clinicians not always referring their patients to peer support? And this will also identify gaps in peer support and the knowledge, and maybe things we may have to research more later on.
Well, picking up on that, how are you with clinicians? How are you finding that interaction? And do they know you exist? Like you said, some are referring, some are not. So maybe you can talk about some of the positives and also some of the challenges with that.
Well, it's interesting. There's challenges. I have spent the last 5 years talking to the public, redoing my posters, my rack cards, so people really get that their facilitators are trained, and we ask for that education piece. So the way, a lot of ways, I'm getting to the clinicians is by speaking at conferences, going to where they're at and speaking. And that is really bridging some of the gap. And I think research is going to bridge some of the gap that they'll send people. I think clinicians are busy and often forget that, there's other resources in their communities and to send people. But it really is knocking on doors and speaking at conferences, and any opportunity I have about peer support, so they understand really what we're doing and what we're about. And I'm getting somewhere. I am getting somewhere, especially more. And I don't know if it's always with the family physicians, as with the social workers and physios who will reach out. I have a talk with some social workers coming up next month who are in our primary healthcare umbrella, just wanting to know more. I've had a talk with Atlantic Mentorship Network in New Brunswick, wanting to know more about what we're doing. So I will get people reach out. I will get some, I've had the occasional occupational therapist say, can we just sit in one of your groups? So I'm getting that. Acadia University's here. I've go in and talk to their counseling, their master's of counseling class coming out, and the physio down, talk to them. So get them before they even get out of school, and that's been helpful. And one of the counseling classes here in Acadia, they actually have their students now start coming into community-based organizations. So they've been coming into our organizations, and we'll only allow one at a time to just see what it's all about. So I think I'm breaking walls down, but it's progress, and there's definitely more work.
Yeah, there always is. And I like the idea of taking it to the schools, because that's one of the things I was going to ask is, it has to go to the medical schools. And I mean, with an interdisciplinary pain clinic, they usually have either psychology or social worker or an OT. So those people would understand the importance of a peer support and having some kind of a community to work on. If you were to give some takeaways for the audience, what would they be?
Takeaways. If there's a peer support group there, take time and check it out. It may not be for you, may not, and I know other ones are run differently, but look at the organizations that have that education component. Ask questions. Are the facilitators trained? Do they have the education component? And try out the hardest time, the first time walking through the door is actually the hardest time for people. But I do, suggest just check it out. And peer support doesn't mean a support group too. It can be a support group as a group, but it also can be one-on-one. It's connecting with someone else who has the same lived experience. And I think it's really worth checking it out.
So maybe just kind of elaborate on why the first one is the hardest for most people.
I think it's because, one, you're acknowledging that you're living with this. You're going to share it with a bunch of strangers, and you're wondering, what is peer support all about? Unfortunately, peer support sometimes, and if the group is not run well, has had a bad rap. And if it's not run well, it can set people back. And we need to be aware of that. That's why, like I said, I won't have my in-person groups out of where I can't see what's going on. And that's why it's so important for your facilitators to be trained, and their self-care is important, and their connection with the other facilitators is important. So then when they have things that encounter, they have people they can talk with too. So that way, the group is run well. So I think for the first person to first time come through that door, you just don't know what to expect. And that's why we have a structure and we have an agenda. So they know what to expect. They know what's there. But until they come through the first door the first time, do they really understand? So it's tough. I mean, living with pain is tough.
Yeah, and so that goes to a good point is one should do their research before entering a group. So you mentioned Pain BC out in BC, and then you have your organization as well. So, I think that's important because you're right. There is a lot of the standards are different, we'll just say, across the country.
Yes, good way of putting it.
Yeah. So, well, that is awesome. I think the work you're doing is great. And like I said, I know from our own experience, in a very small way, and we're hoping it'll go across the country too. I guess, which is the other thing, as I'm just ready to wrap up, I'm thinking there's a lot of different organizations doing the same thing. How do we all get under one umbrella to make it work for everybody? That's the
I wish you were going to Ottawa this weekend. The Canadian Pain Society is this weekend in the National Congress, and they're bringing everybody kind of together. And that's what we need to bring is people together and work together and do what Pain Canada is doing. They're bringing us together to have discussions. And that's it. You've got to all come under the same roof and talk to each other.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for all the hard work that you're doing, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Tom. This is great. And I appreciate what you're doing with these podcasts. These are all great learning tools for people living with pain.
Well,
and
feel free to share it. That's what we're trying to do is educate people. So thank you for being on the show. And like I said, I like the idea of the peer support. It's very helpful. So for our audience, check out the People in Pain Network and also other peer support, as Virginia was mentioning, out in BC. On our next show, we're going to be speaking to Deb Denman, the Director of Knowledge Mobilization for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence, and she's going to talk about how research can help provide information, and also what do you do with that research. So they're going to really talk, as I said, they're going to take, who has time to read a 100-page research paper? I guess if you want to have, a good night's sleep, you could start with reading that, but they take it and they knock it down to some very bite-sized information that's helpful. So she'll be on the next show. So hit subscribe and like button. This way you'll get the latest episodes. For feedback about the show or more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Chronic Pain COE and on Instagram at Chronic Pain_COE. Once again, thanks for being on the show. And to our audience, stay safe and keep the hope alive.
The Most Painful Podcast is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network.